Welcome back. My name is Dave and this is Fuzzee Tutorials. So today we're covering Chapter 3 on our Masterclass series for Picta Graphic for Mac OS. So today we're going to be covering our appearance panel, so our object properties, and a deep dive into layers. Well, let's get started. Okay, so here we go for appearance effects. So we've got a few objects on screen here. So the first thing we're going to look at is our blending options. So we're going to select an object here, and if we go up to our blend in our appearance effects panel, and if you don't have this panel open, you open it with this little icon here. And then we want this effects tab, which is on the far right here. And then we're going to go into blend. And let's take a look at what these different things do. And you'll notice that they're kind of divided into areas of similar types of blending. So you'll notice if we use darken, then it's using those colors to just darken things instead of displaying it over top in full vibrant color. And you can see the little bit of a difference that these make. And basically just experiment with this until you really get a feel for what these different things can do. Now the screen blend is one that I use fairly often, and we've also got things like color dodge and linear dodge. Now a lot of these are holdovers from old school film techniques when you were actually working in the darkroom. And this is another one I use quite often. Now I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'm just taking you through a few of the more common ones. And this difference and exclusion, these are techniques that actually Google used for some of their overlapping logos. If you look at, let's see if I've got a copy of it here. Yeah, so if you look at this logo here for Google Drive, that's how they achieved these color differences in the corners. And now the next thing we can do here is opacity. So all that's doing is adjusting the alpha, so it just makes it partially see-through. And this can be a pretty handy tool to have in your toolkit. It's especially useful when you're dealing with photographs. So the first thing we're going to take a look at here is our fill settings. So we can open this up just by clicking here, and then we can choose our color types. So here we can choose from different gradients or even patterns. So let's look at linear gradient, and it defaults to black and white. And we can adjust our angle here, and it's got some pre-selected ones that you can use. You can also type it in manually if you have a particular number that you know you're going to use, and this button here will reverse it. Now you can also come over here and you can double click on the object, and you'll see this little line appear with dots on the end. So here you can actually control things a lot more precisely. So if I wanted to make a nice angle gradient like that. Now you have a lot more choices in this, of course. Now if we go in here, click on the little color well or ink well, then we can change our colors. But you can also add more colors. So if I go anywhere in here and just click, it'll add another inkwell using the same color that's right at that spot. But now I can change this. And I can add another one. Now there is a limit to how many you can add. I don't remember the exact number, but you can add quite a few. So you can achieve some pretty interesting effects with this. And then we also have a radial gradient. Now you can use this radial gradient to actually create some really realistic looking spheres. So let's just zoom in a little bit on this. So if we go into here and select our radial gradient, and let's work with blue here. Oh, that's a little too much. And now we're just going to reverse that. And we're going to get rid of our stroke. So now if we go over here and we double click, now we've got a lot more control. Now if you want to widen the light color area up here, you would just take your inkwell and drag it along your line. And you can just keep adjusting it until you get it just the way you want it. Alright, let's zoom back out to canvas. Now the next option that we have here is angle gradient. So the way this works is from a central location. So actually let's zoom back into this particular object. So now you can make it look kind of like a pyramid. And we still have the same levels of control. And you can also make this multicolor. So if we were to go back to this one here and change this to an angle gradient, you can see we get some interesting effects. And this is actually a technique that I used when I recreated the DaVinci Resolve logo. Where have I got it here? So if I was to take all these top portions and make them invisible, you can see that's what I used there. And then our next option is a pattern fill. Now we can go into here and select different patterns, and you can also create your own patterns. So I'm actually just going to show you a quick example of that. So let's just hide some of these other things here. And I'm going to reveal this little pattern that I kind of made up. So if we just take and select all of these, and then we go into our fill and choose pattern. So whatever we've got selected, if we come down here and click on this little plus sign, it'll add that as a pattern, which we can then use to fill other objects. And if you didn't get it right, or you want to delete a pattern out of there, you can just right click on it, and then you get this little pop-up, and you just click on remove pattern. So now if we get rid of that and we bring back our let's bring back our large shape here, and we'll select that. So if we go back into our actual patterns, and now we can fill it with our new pattern. And then we can adjust our scale of pattern. So if we want to reduce that size, and you'll notice it fills it seamlessly. And you can also adjust the opacity of that pattern. And you can also adjust your angles, like so. And if you double click it, you actually get access to the underlying pattern, which you can then move around and line up to get it just the way you want it. All right, and the last option we have on the list is image. So now we can go and select something to use. So let's go into some of my stock photos here. So we can just pick any picture in here that we want. And it'll place that in there, and then we've got some options in here. So we can scale to fit, or we can stretch to fit. So if you scale to fit, then it keeps the aspect ratio. And of course you saw when we stretch to fit, then it stretches it out. Now if you want to have this fill the box, and you can just change the shape of the box, and it'll eventually fill the whole thing. And once again, you can double click on it, and then you can actually change the alignment of the image in there. Now there are other ways to get something inside of an object, like an image, but we're going to cover that in a different section. And once again, you can scale the image or change the opacity. Okay, just before we get into the next area, I want to show you another kind of a cool trick. I'm going to show you how you can take any image and turn it into a seamless tileable pattern. So it's a little bit of a trick. So let's just change this back to regular color. Now you wouldn't think that a picture like this could be turned into a seamless pattern, but it can. But we need to do a couple things here first to aid in what we're doing. So we're going to go over here and we're going to turn on snap to grid, and we'll show our grid. So we're just going to get this lined up, and now I'm going to create a guideline at the top, and we're going to create another one at the bottom. Actually, we need to move this up a little bit, give ourselves some working room. Okay, so now we'll turn that snapping and grid back off. Now we're just going to drag a copy off to the right here, and it'll automatically align itself. And then we're going to go to our alignment tab, and we're going to mirror this. And now we're going to select both of these, and we're going to option drag them down to create another copy. And we're going to vertically mirror this. Now we're going to get rid of this guideline here. Now there's a little bit of a quirk in how stuff gets spaced. So we're just going to nudge this up a little bit so that it's not leaving any gaps. And we're going to do the same here. We're going to select these two outside ones, and we're going to nudge it over to the left a little bit. And once we're satisfied we have no gaps, then to get our final image here, we're actually going to export this. And the reason that we're going to export it is due to a little positioning quirk in Picta Graphic. If we just were to select this and then save it as a pattern, when we go to actually use it, because it's still 4 separate objects, then sometimes depending on your sizing, it'll introduce little gaps between them, and it kind of ruins the whole seamless look. So we're just going to export this as a PNG, but we're going to export as selected objects. And we're going to choose PNG. And if you're just going to be using this on screen, then 72 DPI is fine. If this is something that you actually intend on printing, then you're going to want to bump this up to 300 or even 600 DPI, or pixels per inch. And we'll just put this in our Photos folder. Okay, now we're going to get rid of that, and we're going to go in here, and we're going to pull the new image that we just created. So here's our tileable image we just made. We'll drag that in. So now, if we we'll get rid of this panel. And if we go into our fill, click on pattern, and now we can turn this into a pattern. So now we can delete that. So if we make our big shape here visible again, and we'll fill this with that pattern. And now if we scale this down, you can see we've got a nice seamless tileable pattern. And once again, if we want to line it up a little differently, we double click on it, and then we can set our alignment to just where we want it. And there we go. Okay, I'm going to show you a neat little trick you can do here. And this is where you can really start playing with your blend modes here. So we're going to go to stroke, and we're going to create a bit of a little bit of width here. And now we've got some different options with patterns. So we can center it, or put it on the outside of an object, or of course on the inside, which is where we started. Normally when you're making a new object, it's going to default to center. And you can also change your blend modes. But the interesting thing I wanted to show you here is you can actually take any one of these built-in functions here, whether it be the drop shadow or inner glow or anything like that, or fill, stroke. You can make multiple copies of them. So let's say we want to have 2 outline strokes, so we can just either go down to here and hit the plus sign and then choose stroke, and it works a little bit different than what you might expect. So if we take this black stroke and let's widen it a little bit, so it's going to go on top of our other stroke, even though it's underneath it. So now if we were to center this one, and we center our other one, and let's make this one a little wider. So now you can see we've got one on top of the other in the middle of it. Now that's a kind of an interesting effect, but if you're going for something a little different, let's take this other stroke here and set it to outside only. So now we've got it set up in a pattern like that. And you can create as many layers of these as you want. Now the thing to keep in mind with stroke is when you resize an object, the stroke is going to say the same weight. So if I make this really small, it's going to look like it's proportionally much thicker. Now we covered this in the last chapter, and I showed you how you can rescale an object and scale the stroke along with it. But I'm going to show you something a little different. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this last stroke here. So what I did is I right-clicked on there, and then I'm just going to click remove. And the reason I'm doing it this way is the technique I'm about to show you, you have to kind of do it one at a time. So we're going to go up to our modify menu, and we're going to outline stroke. So now what it's done is it's converted that stroke to another shape, and it's put it into a group. So now you'll notice that this is a separate shape, and we can hide it or bring it back. So now it's actually gotten rid of the stroke on here, so we're going to bring it back. First thing is we'll change our alpha back to 100%, and we want this on the outside, and then we'll make it a little wider, and we'll go back over here and we'll outline our stroke. So now we've got two of these in their own group. So now, when you saw before in the last chapter where we had to actually use the sizing tool to get those to scale proportionally, now because they're independent shapes, they're going to scale with the image. So if you're going to be converting this to another format, for instance, SVG, which is scalable vector graphic, this is something you're going to want to do, because if you're going to scale a vector graphic like that, if you've got it set up as an actual stroke, you're going to have the same issue. But by using the outline stroke, then when you bring it into another program as an SVG, then it'll scale properly. Okay, so we've got some other settings here for stroke. Well, let's just thicken this up a little bit so we can see it. So you can also choose the type of line, just like I showed you in the last chapter. And of course, the thicker you make it, the wider it's going to space things apart. And you'll notice we can also put some ends on the line. And we can still set them to inside, but if you do it as an inside, it's going to take off your line ends that you created. And we can do it as an outside. And once again, it'll take off those ends. So if you want to have those ends in there, you have to keep it as centered. Okay, so let's move on to our drop shadow. So we'll turn that on, and we'll unpack that. And you also got different blend modes you can use with this. So here we can change our shadow offset. So just to make it a little more obvious so you can see it, we'll make this 4 in the horizontal, and let's make it 5 in the vertical. And we can also adjust our blur mode. So this allows you to change it from very soft shadow to a hard line. And once again, you can create multiple drop shadows. So if I right click here, I can go add drop shadow, and then I can take this other one and I can give it a negative value. So something like this can be useful. But we're just going to remove one of those. Now I'm going to go to our fill color and just change it to something else so this becomes a little more visible. Now we've got our inner shadow, so that's going to create a shadow on the inside. So this is kind of handy to use if you're making buttons for a web or app interface. You can give them that 3D look by using a combination of inner and outer shadows. Let's make these a little bigger so you can really see it. And you can also change your size and softness here. So it's going to really give you that kind of beveled button look. And as with the drop shadow or the inner shadow, you can also come in here and change the actual color of the shadow. So if you wanted to make it a little more solid of a green color as opposed to just darkening it, you could do that this way, or you could completely change the color of it. But I'm going to show you another way you can get a similar effect, but all the way around it. So we'll just turn that off for now. Now if we were to create another inner shadow, and this time we'll use the negative numbers. And then we can go into the color and we can actually change this to white. And we'll drop the alpha down a bit. And we can widen that a bit. So now that gives us our 3D bevel. Let's just get rid of our stroke so you can see it a little better. So that gives us our kind of a traditional beveled button. Alright, let's turn those off. And now we've got outer glow. So if we wanted to make it look like our green button is glowing, then we can change our glow size here. And once again, we can also adjust the alpha to make it a softer glow or a more intense glow. And we can also do the same thing on the inside with the inner glow. And we can make that a little wider. And then we've got our final option of blur. So we can set the amount of blur. And that kind of gives us almost like the effect of an inner and outer glow at the same time. Crank it right up. And it can have a little bit of a different effect if we're using, say, a pattern fill. So you can see it also will blur the entire pattern. So if we just crank that back down a little bit. And all of these you can use multiple instances of it. So another handy feature of these is if you've got several different objects. So let's turn some of these other objects back on. Now, of course, you can take any object and you can select it. You can right click, copy the style, and then we could paste that style to another object. Oops. Paste that style. Okay, so if we have one particular item on an object that we want to copy a style from, rather than copy this style for the entire object, we can just right click on whichever it is we want to copy, and we can copy that drop shadow, for instance, and then I can go to my other objects and I can right click and I can go paste. Now, unfortunately, you can't select a whole group of objects and do this all at once. The reason being, and I'll show you exactly why, if we were to select all of these objects and try and paste just the drop shadow, it actually winds up pasting all of the style. So I'm not sure exactly why this bug exists. And this same feature you can use with any individual effect. So I could copy a particular stroke by right clicking and go copy stroke. And then I could select that other object and paste that stroke in. All right, moving on. Okay, so let's get into dealing with layers. And there's a lot of things that you can do with layers that can ease your workflow. One of the main things that I like to do with it is use it for ordering objects. So say for instance I've got a whole group of objects and I need to be changing their vertical order. So you've got a number of ways you can do this. So if I pick a single object here, I can go up to Arrange, and then I can go, say, Bring to Front, or I can use my keyboard shortcut, which is using the square brackets and the Command key, so I can move that back one at a time. If I hold the Shift key down, then I can move it directly to the front or all the way directly to the back. And that's a pretty good method for handling stuff. It's pretty quick. You can also go over here to your Properties panel and your Alignment tab, and you can do the same thing. You can bring an object all the way to the front, or you can send it backward one at a time. But another way that I like to handle stuff, and the reason I like to do it this way, is if you have a lot of grouped objects, it's much easier to do it this way. If you want to take something and move it outside of a group into another group, or change it within a group, it's much easier to do it this way. So if we go down to our layers, we can just grab that shape and we can change it this way directly. Just drag it to where we want it to be. And you can also, this way you can actually take groups of objects. So if I wanted to, let's say we'll take this and get it up right below our other one, and we'll select them both off of our layers, and then we can move them both together like that. And this is especially useful if you've got a really complex graphic that you're working on and you've got several groups, and maybe each group has got 20 or 30 layers in it, and you're trying to select a specific object. It's much easier to do it this way than to be doing it out here. Especially if you've got like layers of text on top of graphics and stuff, it can be very difficult to select an object that's right next to the text without actually selecting the text instead. So this makes it a lot easier. And then you'll notice we've got these little eye icons, so you can turn objects off and on for visibility just by clicking on that. And let's say you've got an object in the background that you want to trace something out of, and you don't want to keep selecting it by accident, so you can lock it. So if you go right here next to the eye, just on the other side of that line, so you can click that and it turns a little lock on. You could also right click on it and then select lock from the list, and that's going to just toggle it. If it's already locked, it'll unlock it. So now if I've got this object locked, now I can no longer move it. It's stuck there until I unlock it. So that prevents you from accidentally grabbing it and moving it. But you can still grab it and move its position within your stack of layers. Now the nice thing with the turning visibility of objects off and on is you can do it full layers at a time. And where this is handy is, let's say you're working with a business card. Matter of fact, let me open one up for you and show you. So let's see. So let's go down to a business card design. So normally when you're working with business cards, if you've got a front and a back, rather than having two separate files, you can put them in one file. So then I can just turn off this entire file or turn off this entire layer and turn the other one on. And like I've shown you in a previous chapter, we can then export the individual layers and tell them to export them whether they're hidden or not, and each layer gets exported as a separate file. So if you need to learn how to do that, just refer back to chapter 1, and I show you in there how to do that rather than covering it again here. So that's it for this chapter. So in chapter 4, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the scaling and rotation tools, smart duplication, our properties panel, which we touched on a little bit today. We're going to get into the shapes library and the styles library. So thanks for hanging out with us today. We'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.